Welcome back to Perfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined by my co host and dear friend, Jacob LaQuire. It's a little bit rainy here today in Charlotte, but we got a lot of good stuff to talk about, a lot of good content. So I'm going to let you kick off the beer of the week and we'll get right into it.
Yeah, for sure. Our beer of the week this week is Jam Session from Noda Brewing. It's pretty good. It's all right. I think it's good for a rainy day like today. And like you said, a lot of stuff to talk about, especially on the Panthers side. This past, I think it was what, Friday when it happened, when Derrick Brown got it, or maybe Thursday when Derrick Brown got his big extension, which is huge. 96 million over 4 years with just over 63 million guaranteed. I think you projected like exactly that about a month or two ago on Twitter. So big props to you there. But I think it's really good. It kind of breaks that streak that we were talking about of McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Brian Burns, all the successful first round picks that we had selected being traded elsewhere. And now Dan Morgan comes in, Brent Tillis, everybody. Their first big extension. I think it's actually the first overall extension, other than maybe JJ Jansen. Um, that we keep one of our core foundational players here. It's huge.
Yeah, it is. And hopefully don't jinx it. We did extend Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore, and then they got shipped out after those extensions. And then everybody's aware of the Brian Burns debacle. But like you said, the $96 million over 4 years, a lot of times, a lot of the top players at their position, their contracts are fairly easy to project. And what I mean by that is typically they're going to stay in the same APY as people that you would kind of put in their same stratosphere. So in this case, he's a top 10 pick. He's done really, really well in terms of numbers, whether it be like pressure rates, run stop rate. Obviously, led the league. I think broke the tackle record for interior defensive lineman last year. Had a lot of those accolades to his name. But his name was getting thrown around in terms of these extension talks with guys like Chris Jones and Aaron Donald, and he just doesn't have the first team all pros. He doesn't have the resume as those guys have. So you'd have to compare him to a Quinnen Williams or a Dexter Lawrence. And when you look at the contract structure in terms of the APY, he's right there with them. What's interesting is when you look at the guaranteed money he gets, it's actually lower than Quinnen Williams, lower than Justin Matabuke, who got extended this offseason. He's lower than Jeffrey Simmons and Dexter Lawrence. And then he's right after that, a little above Vita Vea and Ed Oliver. And I would put him right in that kind of category. And that's where guaranteed money is a lot of times the indicator of how teams are viewing and evaluating a lot of these players.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think he's actually a good step ahead of both Vea and Oliver there. I think statistically, you could argue that Brown is one of, if not the best, run stopping defensive tackle. At least he showed that last year. Most run stops, according to PFF, at 88. Like you said, set the record for most tackles by a defensive line or a defensive tackle in a season last year. And while he's not the supreme pass rusher that a guy like Chris Jones is, or Matabuke was last, or Aaron Donald was before he retired, you got to look at what he's had to work with, right? I mean, he's had Brian Burns for a lot of his career, but Burns didn't have a great year last year. Shy Tuttle was not very good at all last year. And on the other side, it was like YGM, it was Justin Houston, it was everybody, and none of them really contributed. So I think that this year, with the upgrades in totality along the defensive line with Clowney, Wanham, Ashawn Robinson, I think aside from being just a good run stopper and space eater, he'll be able to rush, like create more pressures and rush the passer more. So that should be a good step for him on his new contract. Also, extending him saves us about 5 million on the cap this year on his fifth-year option. It was the same thing that happened with Taylor Moton when Moton was on the tag and we extended him from the tag. It saved some money there. So created about 5 million in space. Now we have more than enough to sign all the draft picks and maybe get one more piece if it comes to that, maybe like Stefon Gilmore or something like that. But overall, I think this is good. Like a good contract structure. OTC over the cap released his contract details earlier today. And after 2025, there is no more guaranteed money. It's all this year, next year, and then stuff like signing bonuses, like first day bonuses, stuff like that. So even if he were to take a massive downturn for the worst, there's going to be easy outs along the contract. So with this contract, with all the other deals that we've signed this year, I think Brent Tillis has done masterful work.
Yeah. No, he's been really smart about how he's approached a lot of these signings with how he's decided to rebuild the defensive line. I loved the fact that we added Ashawn Robinson to allow Derrick Brown to be more effective in the pass game and not just the run game. So a lot of good pieces that we have in place. What I liked about this is that I wanted us to extend Brian Burns last year. It didn't happen. And then understanding kind of the debacle that came from the Burns situation, it was like, okay, well, we need to extend Derrick Brown before this becomes Burns 2.0. And so getting this done, getting us set for OTAs, the offseason, we don't have to deal with all these questions, both to the front office and to the players about, hey, are you getting paid? Like, what's going on? Are you going to hold out? We don't have to deal with any of that. And that is a breath of relief. It's nice. It's something that you can appreciate as a fan, us as analysts. And so the question, I guess, will be: is JC Horn next? We'll see if he can stay healthy this year. I don't know if that's a guy that we will extend. We might actually get more value by just picking up the 5th-year option and then maybe letting him walk, depending on how we rebuild the cornerback room in this draft, next draft, maybe next year in free agency. So we'll see about that. Panthers voluntary workouts started yesterday. A lot of players showed up. Believe it or not, work at a restaurant right now. And Shy Tuttle came in the other night. Dude's a big man, and he's a really fun. And it was cool. I saw the video of everybody going in. I was like, oh, that's Shy Tuttle. And so it'll be cool to see if more Panthers players kind of make their face in kind of the Charlotte area and kind of get to see them interact with the community a little bit more. But really excited that everybody's ready for this kind of fresh start, clean slate. And I think everybody's excited for the moment, players, coaches, and fans.
Yeah, I think across the board there's a sense of positivity for the Panthers, which isn't something we've had a lot of the past. How long's Tepper on the team? Like past 6 or 7 years
What,
now.
2018? Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. I think we have a fresh, energetic coach, and he proved that yesterday. Yeah, yesterday. There's a video on the Panthers Twitter or X, if you want to call it, where Canales is shaking the hands of every player walking into I think their meeting before their on field and the weight room workouts and stuff like that. It's like a 2 minute video because I don't want to like say everybody was there, but there had to have been like 50 or 60 players there for a voluntary workout. Usually, not a lot of people show up to these, but I guess the energy that Canales brings, the new era in the air, Bryce Young bringing in a lot of excitement. I guess that's got a lot of people here. And like to prove this, like Jadeveon Clowney was there, and Clowney is famous for signing like after training camp. Like and just having his summers to himself with his family, stuff like that. But he's in there getting the workouts, and so that's really cool to see. It is a new era, and like you said with J.C. Horn, hopefully he's on the field a lot this year because corner might still be a question, but overall, I think everybody's positive going into this season, and a big part of that too is the draft that's coming up, right? And before the draft, we're kind of done with the pro day circuit. I think the last pro day is actually tomorrow. But we're getting into the visits now, like the team visits, the local visits, the 30 visits, and we've been doing a Twitter thread of all the announced 30 visits, kind of like their raw score, where they're at on the consensus board, small cut ups, things like that. And a couple new 30 visits were announced over the weekend and this morning in Washington receiver Jalen McMillan and Texas tight end Jadavion Sanders. Both pass catchers. Xavier Leggett and Devontae Walker were also announced as local visits. So there's kind of a theme going on with all the visits so far. I think we have 11 confirmed 30 visits, and out of that, I believe 8 of them are pass catchers or running backs. So there's a clear emphasis, I think, on what the coaching staff and the front office is looking for in the draft or in the draft coming up. And just wanted to pose to you, like, is it clear that wide receiver is the main priority or is a huge priority?
I mean, let's talk about the backgrounds of Dave Canales and Joe Idzik, the head coach, offensive coordinator. These are guys that have backgrounds in wide receiver coaching. And where have they come from? Tampa Bay and Seattle, teams that have had great wide receiver duos over the past half decade or more. And so when you look at that and what they've worked with, and they understand how they can use those players and pieces to elevate an offense and passing game, absolutely. I think there should be a priority on those guys, especially with how deep and good this wide receiver class is. So we've had 4 wide receiver visits, we've had 2 tight end visits, like you said, we had 2 running back visits, and a couple defensive ones. But there's a lot of people in the Panthers fan base that think we're going to go defense early and often, and I don't personally see it. I see what Dan Morgan and Brant Tillis did. They said, hey, we had a good defense last year. We obviously lose some pieces, but we rebuilt the defensive line. We got some pieces on the back end. We feel confident about that group. And now we need to turn the offense around and make sure we're building around Bryce Young. And we saw that with signing interior offensive linemen, getting 2 guards in free agency. So I think it is really going after and getting guys that Bryce can throw to. So we'll see who those guys are. I know a lot of people have been high on like a big bodied X receiver like Keon Coleman or even Xavier Leggett, who's had some local visits. But I'd be more intrigued with us going kind of the Jalen McMillan route, getting a Brendan Rice later in the draft, and then trying to get a superstar wide receiver if we can. If say a Donnie Mitchell or Lad McConkey's there at 33 or 39.
Yeah, I'm with you there. The early defense movement, I don't really see it either because while it is a deeper receiver class, right, there is some star power at the top. And if we say go like corner and edge at 33 and 39, if we stay at those picks, you're going to be missing out on a lot of good players. Like, what if Adonai Mitchell falls, like you said? I know they visited with Brian Thomas Jr. During the combine, so they're pretty high on him. Lad McConkey is obviously a huge riser in the draft circuit, and he's a top 25 player for me as well. So somebody that I would love for the team to have. But say you end up picking like at 65, and you're left with, and I don't want to diminish or demean these prospects, but like Malachi Corley wouldn't be my first choice at receiver in this
No.
draft, or a guy like Tez Walker, or like just a bunch of those guys where there are clear upgrades, like starters that we could draft at 33 and 39, and to not be able to get one and then end up with like Malik Washington or somebody like that as the wide receiver prize of this draft, I'm just not really in on that. And obviously, I think a lot of these guys can play in the NFL, but we need a difference maker. Deontay Johnson, despite his cool workout and him dapping up Bryce yesterday and stuff like that, I don't think he's enough to catapult what was a bottom 3 receiving group last year into a league average group. We need more bodies there. And so getting a McConkey, getting even a Keon Coleman at 39, or if we move back or something like that, I think that's something that the front office and coaches staff have to prioritize in the draft. Now, I wouldn't be opposed to getting like a corner at 39 or an edge rusher at 39 as well, or vice versa with 33. But you need a receiver early, and I think that's going to be the crux of a lot of mock drafts and even the main draft when it happens on. I think the first day is the 25th, but if all's the same, we're not going to be participating in that. So on April 26th, when the second and third round are.
Yeah, no, and I think that has to be the position of priority. You brought up Deontay Johnson, and you looked at Tampa Bay. He plays like kind of that Chris Godwin role, a guy that can separate, kind of move all over the field. You go to Seattle, Tyler Lockett ish. Now, I don't think he has the top end speed that Tyler Lockett does, but the ability to separate and make plays, that's obvious in Deontay Johnson's game. So it's getting that other big body, just mover, a Mike Evans, a DK Metcalf. And so I understand when players, not players, fans of these players comp Keon Coleman and Xavier Leggett to kind of those roles in this offense. I understand it from that philosophical approach, but there's a lot of other better wide receivers that we can get. And it's just we need to prioritize that in the 30s. It's got to be one of those picks. And we talked about this, I think, when we talked about corners last week. If Kool-Aid McKinstry's there at 33, it's going to be very hard not to pass him up. And then maybe taking the best wide receiver at 39. So we'll kind of see how everything falls. We're going to do another mock draft simulator. This time, instead of doing 2 separate ones, we're going to do one joint one, and Jacob's going to kick it off. So he's currently at pick 33. A couple people have called in with some trade offers. And are you going to take one of these?
Yeah, so I'm a big trade back guy. Unless you need to get a QB, I think trading back is always the smarter thing to do. Unless you're like the Cardinals and Marvin Harrison Jr. So like unless there's a superstar there. I think trading back is always prudent, right? Because the draft is throwing darts at a board, and you get more dart throws. And so in this simulator, when Seattle offers picks 81, 102, and their first and second next year for pick 33, I'm accepting that without hesitation because number one, you get a third round pick and a fourth round pick. Number two, we have another second rounder, like six
We
picks
don't have a
later.
second next year, so that's
And
smart
yeah,
to add that
and
future second.
exactly. Next year we don't have a second, so get a first and a second next year with that trade. So I took it. So looks like you're on the clock here with 39 if we're alternating. And some of the guys available are guys that we talked about, like Lab McConkey, TJ Tampa, the corner, Trey Benson, who is coming in here for a top 30 visit. And another guy who we'll talk about in a few minutes, edge rusher Darius Robinson. So there's a lot of choices there. Which way would you go?
So I'm gonna say this because his player profile is very similar to this player that and their paths at Pittsburgh weren't really in tune. They weren't parallel to each other. But I think Lad McConkey's game compares really well to like an Antonio Brown. Like this is a guy that's a solid route runner. He's quick and out of his breaks, smart football player. And I think if you add him in with Thielen, with Deontay Johnson, all of a sudden now we have three guys that are just going to get open for Bryce and allow Bryce to do what he does best. So that to me would be perfect here. We traded back, like you said, at 33, but if Lad McConkey's there at 39, we're taking him.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if he's like Antonio Brown. I can see the what you mean though, like the ability to separate. I think the consensus comparison among a lot of people is Emmanuel Sanders, and I think that's
Yeah.
a pretty good comp. And we, like you said, we need a guy like that. Just because you get Deontay Johnson, who's a separator, doesn't mean like, oh, we have our separator now. Go get a jump ball winner. That's not how it works. You can have more than one really good route runner and more than one person who can get open. Ideally, you have three on the field at the same time. But yeah, that's I think it's a good pick here. I think I'm done with trades though now. Now that I have like all the stuff that I need with like trades and stuff like that, future first, future second, stuff like that. So on the board at 65, we have guys like Michael Hall from Ohio State, the defensive tackle, Jonathan Brooks, another 30 visit guy that's in here. Two of the like consensus top two running backs are in here on 30 visits. Kind of alludes to Dan Morgan and the front office, maybe
But
thinking,
but
hey,
there's somebody else
no,
here available
there's
at
somebody there,
65.
but I wanted to make the point that, they might be thinking about taking a running back early if they have the two best guys according to like all the different draft analysts combined. You know what I mean? But I am going to end up taking a local prospect. Some call him Luke Kuechly 2.0. That's Peyton Wilson. His tape is phenomenal. You just got to hope he's able to stay healthy throughout his career here in Carolina. And I think he will. He played the majority of his senior year and he's just outstanding. And to be able to put Peyton Wilson back there with an aging Shaq Thompson, who did miss all of last year, and signing a guy like Josie Jewell, I think Peyton Wilson will help solidify that second level. And you got to think like this is what the Panthers did when they got Cam, right? Rookie QB year one, linebacker year two to like be the captain of the defense, and it worked out pretty well for him.
Yeah, no, I think Peyton Wilson is definitely the pick if he's there at 65. His medicals are concerning. It's been a lot of upper body or shoulder injuries, which is good. A lot of the injuries that you worry about are going to be neck or like more ligament issues, like knees. So like your ACLs, maybe some ankle sprains, stuff like that. That's going to keep you off the field. So with some of those upper body issues, hopefully that can be cleaned up by the training staff. Maybe he's learned some things along the way with some of these injuries and how to prevent it moving forward. So I think he's the guy if he's there at 65. Dan Morgan being a former linebacker for the Panthers and understanding that we've had guys like John Beeson and Sam Mills and Luke Kuechly, we need to restore that linebacking room. Like that keep pounding mantra really came from being able to just tackle people. And Peyton Wilson is just, he's on another level, like you said, when you turn on the tape. So definitely the guy there. Had a couple trade offers here at pick 81. Not going to take them. We traded back. The Seahawks were desperate to get 33, and we got a lot back from that. And so we went Lad McConkey, we went Peyton Wilson, And currently on the board, we have Ricky Purcell from Florida and Jalen McMillan. Now, I think Ricky Purcell's a little bit bigger, offers a little bit more upside in terms of just having an outside body. He does work out of the slot a lot, like some of the other wide receivers we already have on this roster, but I like Purcell over Jalen McMillan. If both of these guys are on the board at 81, there's a good chance that we take McMillan because he has that top 30 visit. There's stuff in his game that Dave Canales is really like in tune with and wants him to be a part of this Panthers team. And he was a part of the staff that brought in Trey Palmer, a guy that you were big on last year. So I wouldn't be disappointed if we brought in either of these two guys. But for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to go Ricky Purcell at 81.
Yeah, I'm with you there. He's a top 50 player for me, Pearsall, that is. Has probably the best catch of the year against our Charlotte 49ers this past season. Like an Odell Beckham level one-handed
Mm-hmm.
grab. So and he's able to play across the field, like you said, whereas Jalen McMillan is probably going to be a slot only guy for the first couple years of his career. So I'm with you there. The only kickback I would offer is that McMillan actually has caught a touchdown pass from Bryce Young in the 2020 All-American game back before they were at Washington and Alabama, respectively. But I'm with you there. I would go Pearsall too. So we've double dipped at receiver. Got two guys I think who could start, and we have Peyton Wilson. So as far as I'm concerned, I think we're going to be done with receivers from now on, and we have back-to-back picks here, courtesy of the Seattle Seahawks. And a guy we talked about a little bit earlier, another pass catcher, Jatavion Sanders from Texas. Big athlete, a guy that I think is going to thrive with the new anti, what is it, the swivel hip drop tackle, I think is the correct terminology of it. And I'm not sold on our tight end room, right? Like Tommy Trimble's he has potential, right? But he's had potential for the last like 3-ish years or so, however long he's been here. So I'm going to take Jatavion Sanders, tight end from Texas. We get three good pass catchers, and I don't want to. I don't want to say it's all on Bryce now, but it kind of is if you get that and solidify the offensive line in the same offseason.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good route to go. Just keep adding people to the wide receiver and tight end room. These pass catchers for Bryce Young. Allow yourself to be able to diversify out of 11 and 12. And Dave Canales is definitely a guy who leans a little bit more into 11 personnel, wants more wide receivers on the field rather than tight ends. But our tight end rooms trash. And again, going back to the top 30 visit, having those guys come in shows that the organization is very interested in taking this player. So I think if he's available there at like kind of pick 100, maybe a little bit later, depending on the actual draft scenario, he's a great fit for the Panthers. And he's, I think, tight end 3 on your board. He's tight end 2, I think, on a lot of consensus mocks. And he's a good player overall. There's a lot to love, a lot of upside. But here at pick 102, part of what we got back from Seattle in that trade, I think I think I'm going to go offensive guard, and it's the guy that's at the top here. He's scored really well with Roz. We've made the interior offensive line a priority, and I think we're not happy with our depth necessarily. And I think this would open up and allow Braden Christensen to play more of a swing tackle role for us, and maybe be a fill-in if Taylor Moton or Ike Aquano goes down. And that's Christian Mahogany out of Boston College. I think this guy offers a lot of upside and can have time to develop behind Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. And I think that's a huge, huge thing to have, especially when we're probably going to be kicking Corbett in the center.
Yeah, I like that there. We have Christensen, and I think we signed Yash Nyman from the Packers to be good depth, and I think adding a third guy is always good. You want to have 8 really good linemen that you feel good about playing on game day, and so I'm with you there. I'm pretty high on Christian Mahogany myself. Looking at the board now, I see one of your guys here, Audric Estime. I'm
So
not
you're going to
sure if
take him with 141, or you're going to let him fall to me at 142?
that's yeah, because we do have back-to-back picks here. Um, I'm gonna let him fall to you, so you can explain him a little better. We've done a lot of offense in this draft so far, and I do think corner is still a need. So I'm gonna go Kyrie Jackson from Oregon. He was formerly at Alabama, didn't really shine there under Pete Golding, the defensive coordinator at the time, transfers to Oregon, has a really, really good season there. Strong tackler. He's not super sticky in coverage, but he's able to like anticipate and use his length to break up passes and things like that. It's just another body in the corner room, which I think we desperately need because again, right now our starters are J.C. Horn, who's going to be a question mark, Dane Jackson, and Troy Hill if we want to include like the nickel corner. So I think adding another corner there is good. And this is a guy I think at 141 that has a chance to stick around the league. So I'm happy with that pick. And I think I know who you're going to pick now because we already alluded to it.
Yeah, I want to touch on Kyrie Jackson. This guy is 6'4", almost 200 pounds. This is a big dude coming out of Oregon, and so to have a guy on the perimeter, especially when you have a more versatile guy in Dane Jackson and Troy Hill already that can play more slot corner, I think that just gives you more versatility on the back end, and Evero would love that. So I don't know how high the Panthers draft war room is on him, but I think that's a great fit at 141. At 142, like you said, we already kind of alluded to it. I'm going Audric Estime out of Notre Dame. This guy is a true bruiser. I think some of the knocks on him, outside of just obviously speed concerns in his game, in terms of just being a guy that can run past you, is he sometimes plays like he's a smaller, faster, quicker back. And he just doesn't have that in his game. He just needs to be quicker to the hole and then just bruise people. And I think I've talked about this on previous pods. I think I mocked draft him last week when we did this. Is he is one of those guys that's going to be able to get you 3-4 yards, and we struggled in some of those short yardage situations last year. And I think he's a great fit here. He helps rebuild the offense, and so now we are in the seventh round. We are at pick 240. I don't know if this is our last pick, but Jacob, who do you think we should go here? Is it a defensive position? Is it best player available? Who are you thinking is the guy?
Look at 240, and it's like the 17th last pick or 18th last pick. So when I talked about throwing darts at the dartboard has shrunk quite a bit, and we're down to our last dart. So it's not necessarily going to be a hit by any means. At this point, you got to kind of just look at somebody you can project or somebody who's traitsy, right? That could be molded into something. And I said we were done with receiver, but I lied because I didn't know that this is how the board was going to shake out. Going to take Anthony Gould from Oregon State. One of the traits about him, and mainly his biggest trait, which fits really well with what the Panthers need, is that he is a burner. He's going to run past you, run around you, stuff like that. I know that Xavier Worthy gets all the shine for being the speedster, but Gould is right up there with him. And the Panthers kind of need that. They still don't have, even with adding McConkey, Pearsall, they still don't have the guy that can take the top off the defense. I know they have Amir Smith-Marset, who we re-signed to a one-year deal, but he hasn't really shown a ton as a vertical receiver. And Anthony Gould really shined with that at Oregon State this past year. So it's worth taking a flyer on him there, especially considering we got two stud receiver starters and ended up with a first and second round pick next year. So I'm happy with this draft, and we'll be sure to post it after we post the episode as well.
Yeah, no, we'll post that with our edge class rankings, which I'm kind of already jumping ahead a little bit. But I like this draft class. We had 8 picks in total. We accumulated a lot more in the future. We went 6 out of 8 of those going towards the offensive side, which again, kind of parallels to what we're seeing with the top 30 visits, what we're seeing with the coaching staff philosophy in general, and how the front office has gone about rebuilding the team in free agency. I wouldn't expect the front office to go, okay, we spent all this money on the defensive side. Now let's go and draft a bunch of defensive players. And I may be wrong. We'll see with Dan Morgan and his crew and how they approach the draft and how the draft falls to them. But it's one of those things that I think offense is going to be the priority, and Dave Canales is going to be a huge part of that and a huge catalyst. So now, and I'm jumping ahead again. I thought we were going to go right into the edge class. We do have some news around the NFL. So just like I kind of nailed the head on the nail with the Derrick Brown contract being $96 million over 4 years, about a year and a half ago, I wrote a paper on wide receiver contracts. And I was curious because it seemed like guys that were getting second extensions or third contracts in the NFL were not producing to what they were being paid. compared to guys that were getting second contracts. And again, this is just adherent to the wide receiver position. When you look at the quarterback and, like, say, offensive tackle positions, you don't see this as much. But you don't get what you pay for in essence. So we saw a couple years ago Cooper Cup, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Stefon Diggs. All these guys get these big old contracts. And when we've seen wide receivers get these big third contracts, DeAndre Hopkins, Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, they didn't play up the par with them, even though that their play leading up to those extensions did. And so it's one of those things. We see Stefon Diggs get traded for a second round pick. It's a $31 million dead cap hit for the Bills this year, which is the largest dead cap hit for a wide receiver ever. The Texans restructure him to where it's only a 1 year deal. And Jason Fitzgerald with Over the Cap, he did a great job with his 3 hour, 50-minute long podcast this past week of breaking down how, in essence, the Texans are paying like $35 million for a 1 year rental with how everything gets transferred and what they're paying him this year. And so it works out for Stefon Diggs. Like, he's getting his payday. That's not the issue. This does create a precedence that if you whine enough, in the case of Antonio Brown and then now Stefon Diggs, that you'll just get paid, you'll get moved, and life goes on. So, do you think this is a needle mover now that we've kind of moved past kind of these third contracts and these players not living up to the hype? Do you think Diggs at about $20 million this year on the Texans cap, is he worth that investment? And does he elevate that roster to where now they're a true contender in the AFC to where they can go step for step, stride for stride with teams like the Chiefs and the Ravens? Because they got embarrassed by the Ravens twice last year. Is this a team that can get over that hump and be like the Joe Burrow Bengals a couple years back on his second year when he had Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and they went to the Super Bowl and they were a couple plays away from winning it?
It's such a tough question, right? Because when you add Diggs to this team, and I saw a post earlier today, it was like rank these wide receiver trios, and it had the Houston trio, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Diggs, and a bunch of other ones. And obviously, Houston was first because they're the only receiver trio, really. Even across the league, I would say that Diggs, Tank Dell, and Collins are the only established, like, good trio of three wide receivers. But I would feel better, I think, if this were a 2-year deal because I think I don't know if the Texans are ready to compete with the Chiefs or the Ravens, like you said, this year, but maybe in like year 3 of Stroud and everybody, and they had another piece in the draft and stuff like that, they'd be able to. I'm not sure, but what I do know is they're all in, I think, this year. Uh, they have a rookie QB contract who played very well last year. They have the defensive rookie of the year, and Will Anderson as well. They're able to sign people like Daniil Hunter to what was it, like 49 over 2 and 48 was guaranteed or something like that. So they clearly have a an idea that they are strong enough and good enough to compete in the AFC. It's just very hard for me to bet against Patrick Mahomes because we talked about this before we recorded. It's reminiscent of when they traded Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins, right? And
Yep.
the Dolphins are loading up, right? Tua's he's healthy now. Jalen Waddle broke I think it was the rookie receptions record in his rookie year. Tyreek Hill is there now, and all the Chiefs are falling now, and the Chiefs are over. And then the Chiefs won back-to-back Super Bowls without Tyreek Hill. So I just don't know if they're going to be good enough to get past that. Now, obviously, Chris Jones is 2 years older now. Travis Kelsey's 2 years older now, and stuff like that. But the Chiefs have been shown to be resilient, even with losing strong players, and they draft well the past couple years. So I'm not sure there. And then Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. We liked what they were able to do last year with the addition of Todd Munkin, with all the stuff they did on offense. They made it to the AFC Championship, and while that wasn't Lamar's greatest game, I still think he had an excellent season, and I think that their offense can only get better. The defense might be a question mark after losing Mike McDonald to Seattle, but I don't know. Like, for what it's worth, I think the Texans are a clear number 3 on paper in the AFC. Um, but then again, you can't count out the Bills and Josh Allen. Even though I think that this year is going to be like a mini regression year before they go all in on a run next year.
Yeah, and I think it depends on if the Bills are able to hit on their draft class. If, say, Adonai Mitchell is there at 27, 28, or they move up and they grab him, or they grab a Brian Thomas, somebody that's a electric that they can put on the outside and replace some of the production they lost from Diggs and Gabe Davis. Khalil Shakir takes a step. Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox are doing their thing. I think you still give Josh Allen a bunch of weapons. We saw when a lot of the stars on defense went down last year that Sean McDermott was able to have that defense playing well regardless. So you hope with some of those things in place that you're still able to be a playoff contender. I think their Super Bowl window, at least for this year, is kind of closed, and that's yet to be seen. We saw Patrick Mahomes go win back-to-back Super Bowls after they traded Tyreek Hill, and I don't think any of us really expected them to kind of be in that stratosphere still after losing a player of his caliber. So it's hard to say that that's going to be the reality of the situation. I will say with the Texans bringing in Daniil Hunter, Stefon Diggs, guys like that, they are really in a win now mode, and they understand maximizing CJ Stroud's rookie surplus. Is that, hey, if we can load up and we can kind of make that push, we only need 1 year to kind of make it count. And so they're definitely banking on this year being that year. We'll see if that's the case. We'll see if D'Amico Ryans and Bobby Slowick they regress or if they're able to kind of step up. If that having some of these older veterans on the roster, while they look great to start the year, we saw the Tennessee Titans when they were starting to come up with Mike Vrabel. They had Ryan Tannehill, who hadn't his big cap hits really hadn't hit from his extension. They had Derrick Henry, AJ Brown, and they trade a second in essence for Julio Jones. Now Julio Jones didn't play a big part in that season, but they went on and got the number one seed in the AFC. But with injuries and then who they faced in terms of facing a hot Bengals team that year, they weren't able to get over the hump. And so that's what we could see with the Texans. They could light it up in the regular season, have some regression or have a few injuries down the stretch that causes them to kind of miss out on the window that they're trying to open up this year. So I think, like you said, they are a top three team in the AFC right now. The Ravens did lose a lot of pieces. We talked about what the Bills lost this past year. So it does really feel like now it is Texans versus Chiefs. And who knows? Maybe the Bengals draft really, really well. And they make it go at it because they have Joe Burrow coming back from injury. They have Jamar Chase. They have T. Higgins still on the franchise tag. So you wonder if some of these other teams in the AFC that aren't really being talked about as much at this point in the offseason, if there's some dark horses that we really need to be talking about as we move forward.
I think in terms of ASU dark horses, if the Jets can stay healthy on that MetLife turf, I think they have a good chance to be really good this year, and pending their draft selection at number 10. But I think if Rodgers can give them the full season, if Tyron Smith can give them say like 14 games and the backup can be good in the interim, I think that team has a chance to do something in the AFC. And again, even the Jags, I think we might be down on them now, but I think they were on the right path. They just missed their stride. So again, Doug Peterson, please take play calling back, and they can be on the right track. But we'll see there. But yeah, the AFC is going to be, I think, loaded again this year. But I think the NFC is on the rise as well with teams like the Lions and Packers. But I digress. I think it's time to talk about the edge rusher class. We were getting close there a couple of times. We had to talk about mock drafts and the one news around the NFL that we had this week. But we're finally on the line of scrimmage again. We have edge rushers this week, and my favorite group next week, interior defensive line. But the edge rusher class this year, I think, isn't as potent maybe as it was last year up front with guys like Will Anderson, who was as close to generational as you could get, and then guys like Tyree Wilson, Nolan Smith. We talked about Miles Murphy before the pod. Just a bunch of first round caliber guys. Felix and UDK Uzoma talk about good drafting from the Chiefs. Um, I don't think it's that deep this year. There's obviously a clear top three, and then the rest kind of feather out after that. But I think the top guy is again an Alabama guy in Dallas Turner. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right on that. It was interesting. I was kind of doing some research on Dallas Turner, and the 33rd team kind of comped his measurements to Von Miller. And he's got even a longer wingspan than Miller. He's very quick. I think he offers a lot of upside. Like, this is a guy that can get after the quarterback. He's only 21 years old. And just like Will Anderson last year coming out, and I don't think he's nearly the generational prospect that Will Anderson was. I don't think he warrants the third overall pick. I don't think he's the best prospect in this class, but he's one of those guys that I think would really be the starting edge any team that drafts him. The only few teams that he wouldn't be the starting edge aren't going to pick him. A team like the Cleveland Browns with Myles Garrett or the Cowboys with Micah Parsons. So you aren't going to see him go to a team necessarily that already has that edge one. I know a lot of people have him kind of going 8 overall consensus wise. He seems like a good fit for the Falcons, and this might be a little bit foreshadowing of later, but that's kind of what I see with Dallas Turner. I definitely think he is the undisputed number one. I know a lot of people try to point at numbers and try to argue Jared Verse or Leitu Latu that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But yeah, I agree with everything you said that this is the number one guy.
Yeah, well, he's not as technically like incredibly technically advanced like Will Anderson was. Anderson's technique was insane. You could argue that Dallas Turner is a much more violent athlete, and I think that that argument has merit. You talk about his wingspan. His wingspan's the same length as Lowry Markkinen, the 6'10" forward in the NBA. His wingspan's incredibly long, super fast, very violent hands and arms, disciplined in setting the edge, just like Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State players are. Good in the run game as well. He's good in pursuit, and he has a really good long arm, which makes sense, right? Because he has long arms. The only big downside I think to his game is that he needs to increase his pass rushing bag, like add some secondary moves and stuff like that. But other than that, the guy's an athletic freak, right? And you did allude to what will end up being my perfect take, just because I think the Falcons are super easy to read with their draft choices, but I think he's a perfect fit there. Uh, Obviously, they're bringing Kirk Cousins, right? They have I don't know if they're set on offense, but they have all the high
They
draft
brought in
capital
Darnell
invested in
Mooney
offense.
and
Yeah, and Mooney, and traded for Rondale Moore from
exactly.
the Cardinals. That was a weird trade. It was him and Ritter straight swap, I believe.
You
So
mean
I do
Shitter?
think yeah, Desmond Shitter, Desmond Mitter, whatever you want to call him. But no, they do need defense now, right? And this was a team that ended up spending quite a bit on defense last year. I think that was a big talking point for us in free agency. But I think their defense still certainly is the weaker side of the ball. So getting a guy like this, Dallas Turner, who is number one defensive player on my board, he's up there for a lot of people as the number one defensive player. I think he will be the number one defensive player drafted, and I think he fits the team well. I think Raheem Morris is going to have a field day with him.
Yeah, no, I think he's a good fit there. He'd be a great addition to a lot of teams in the top 10. If he falls out of the top 10, I'll be personally surprised. But the guy that's kind of nipping at his heels, the guy that you have is the number two edge in this class, it's Jared Verse. He played at Florida State. He actually faced a lot of the high profile offensive linemen we've already discussed on this podcast in this series. Um, he went up against the one Duke prospect and Jordan
Graham
Morgan's the
Barton.
guy. Yeah, Graham Barton. Yeah, I was thinking the Arizona guy, but he played Graham Barton and a few other guys, and it was very interesting to see. He held his own against those guys, but they also won some reps. There's a lot to like about his game. Teammates, what popped off the page for me is his teammate Patrick Payton has some good tape. He was an explosive guy off the edge, and that'll be a guy to kind of keep in tune for next year or the year after, depending on when he declares. But I actually was more impressed with his teammate than I was Verse.
Yeah, I certainly think Verse is the better player first and foremost, and if you can believe it, it's another Florida State player that transferred from somewhere else. I know that's crazy to say, even though like all their draftable players, none of them were signed by Florida State. They only get transfers, but this is a good transfer. He started his career at the University of Albany up in New York, so I believe that was a D2 school. Comes down here, feasts for the last 2 years. He probably would have been the second or third edge rusher in last year's draft after Anderson and Tyree Wilson. But really good athlete, not as good as Dallas Turner, but athletic in his own right. Really, really fast first step is something that I noticed. Like he would sometimes be ahead of the snap, like even ahead of the offensive lineman, which is never something you want to see as an offensive coach. Like because you know when the ball is gonna get snapped, you never want the edge rusher to beat you. But he did that quite often. He's got good bend, good vision, and he pursues the ball carrier well as well. Or a couple things I wrote. Sometimes he's hesitant with his rushes, like too patient. I guess doesn't know what move to deploy, what angle to take, stuff like that. And he needs to add more like power rush to his game and drive offensive linemen back rather than going around him. But overall, I think he's a super, super strong prospect, and it wouldn't surprise me to see him drafted in the top half of the first round. I think the Saints are a really good fit with Jared Verse because they like the bigger, more athletic defensive lineman.
Yeah, no, his Raws checks out. He's sitting at the second highest out of the top five that we're going to be breaking down. We'll touch on a couple other prospects, but he had a 9.6 there, 12 and a half tackles for losses, 9 sacks. Like, great season. Nothing against him. I think he's one of those top guys. I think, like you said, a team like the New Orleans Saints, if they aren't going to go offensive tackle, which is definitely a glaring need on their
Yeah,
roster.
that's a big need now with the Ramchek news. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when you have some of that coming down the pipeline, that may change their priorities, but they also know Cam Jordan's getting older. So it's one of those things that, okay, are we able to kind of find stop gags and a deeper offensive tackle class and grab somebody in the second round? Do we want to grab somebody there? So that's a completely other different team strategy. But I think that's a great comp to him. Another edge prospect that we'll be talking about, and the reason why he's a little bit lower on your board compared to consensus has this guy at number 2, but it's Leitu Latu out of UCLA. His pressure win rate numbers puts him right by the Bosa brothers coming out of college, which is pretty incredible. He is a little bit older of a prospect. The comparison here is you had Will Anderson at 21 years old last year and Tyree Wilson at 23. That's kind of the similar comparison with Dallas Turner and Leitu Latu. So medicals, I don't know if you want to talk about those, but the only other thing that I really had to note was that Fuago out of Oregon State, I think he's close to one of your top 10 prospects on your board, locked him up when they played. I handled business against them, and that concerns me that he's already an older prospect kind of feasting on some of these younger college players. If he faces some of these better tackles at the NFL, is he just going to disappear for stretches during a game when you need him impacting kind of all facets?
Yeah, I'm not gonna be too shaken up over losing to Talize Fuanga from Oregon State. He's number 9 on my board, third offensive tackle. Really, really good player there. So I'm not super shaken up about that if I'm allowed to by any means. But yeah, you talk about his medicals. He was at Washington his first 2 seasons, but then had what's called neck fusion surgery, and was he wasn't really forced to, but the staff there advised him and said to consider yourself retired from football because that's a serious injury, serious surgery. Anytime you have your neck or your spine involved, that's you always worry about the nervous system and things like that. So took some time off from football. Uh, Actually got cleared by the UCLA medical staff and the doctors there, and so committed to UCLA and played there the last 2 years. And he absolutely dominated. I think he had 34 sacks over the past 2 years, a ton of tackles for loss, or yeah, I think it
He
was
had
40 or
21 and a
30.
half tackles for
Yeah,
losses last year and 13
and
sacks. I mean,
13
he
sacks.
put
Yeah.
up some of the best numbers last year without a doubt.
Yeah, he had a monster season this past year. You could like if you wanted to say that he was edge rusher 2 or even edge rusher 1, I don't think I would have too much of an argument for you there just based on the tape this past season. Really strong, really active hands, a strong motor, so he plays through the whistle, has good backfield vision, so when he sets the edge, he's knowing when to like either maintain or shoot his gap to go after the running back. The USC game against Caleb Williams, which is their big rivalry game. He was excellent that game. Got after Caleb Williams, got after Marshawn Lloyd, the running back. He just wreaked havoc that game. But again, the hang up is the medicals. Like obviously he's been the majority of the last 2 years he's been healthy, but that's always going to linger in the back of your minds. It's the reason I put him one spot below Verse. They're still both top 20 players there, but he's also on the older side. Like you said, Verse is also on the older side. That's a trend that's becoming more and more normalized with COVID year and the transfer portal and NIL. I think we're going to see a lot more super seniors in the draft, but on the older side and different medical concerns. But Other than that, I think he's a very, very well-rounded prospect, and I think a team like Seattle would actually be very good for him. He has the Washington connection there, and despite Boye Mafe's sophomore year ascendance or surge that he had, I think they still need help along that defensive line. You look at them giving Leonard Williams an extension after trading
Hmm.
for him. I think that shows that, and paying Draymond Jones in last year's free agency big money. I think that shows that they see defensive line as a need as well, and I think he'd be a really good starter opposite Mafe or Uchenna Nwosu, whoever starts for them on that Seattle defensive line.
Yeah, no, I think he'd be great pairing. When Nwosu went down last year, that really kind of tanked their ability to get after the quarterback. So having another guy there would be great. The big thing with the neck is the last kind of big defensive prospect that had kind of a neck issue like this was Leighton Vander Esch that went to Dallas, and his career lasted all of 5 years. Obviously, Peyton Manning had his neck injuries, but he's playing a quarterback position where he's not necessarily getting hit every play. When you're a defensive lineman, you usually have contact every single play. So it's definitely something to be worried about, something to definitely, if he doesn't check that box, keep him off your board. It's one of those things that if he doesn't pass that test, that's a risk that, despite the production, despite what he's looking to project as, may limit you in terms of surplus or having a guy for the future. So we'll see. I think the Seattle comp is really, really good. Like you said, these top three kind of break off from the top 20 prospects, and then it's kind of everybody else. And the two guys that we have up next, both Robinsons, and the guy that you have above the analytical darling Chop Robinson is Darius Robinson out of Mizzou. He's actually got longer arms than Dallas Turner. I think Dallas Turner has a little bit under 34 and a half inch wingspan. Um, in this case, Darius Robinson has 34 and a half wingspan. And I think the only difference, he's definitely a freak. He's not as quick, obviously, as Dallas Turner, but this is a big body that once he gets going, it's very hard to stop him.
Right, and the first three guys we talked about are outside backers, right? So odd front, outside linebackers, even front, they're going to be in like 7 tech stances as their defensive ends. I think Darius Robinson is more along the line of a traditional defensive end. So even front, he'll line up over the tackle. Odd front, he could kick inside and line up at like 4 eye, 5 tech, stuff like that. But he is a big man, like you were talking about. Long arms, super strong, fast for his size. I think at his size, he moves very well. Violent hands, physical tackler, and he was a big catalyst as to why the Missouri Tigers this past year had a really good season. I don't think anybody, I know I didn't, and I'm a big SEC fan, project Missouri to be as good as they were, finishing. I believe they finished 12th overall in the final college football playoff ranking. So super high ranking there. Quite a few prospects for them on defense this year. But he was a big part of that. I think he anchored their defensive line well. Very good vision as well. Like he knows, like I was talking about with Latu, when to disengage from his gap and go after the quarterback or after the ball carrier if he's setting the edge. And I just think he's a good addition to a team that needs some strength, needs some oomph along the defensive line. And I know a team like Philly, who's drafted some smaller guys over the years, likes their smaller guys, but I think he'd fit in well there. I would say the Packers as well, but they got Van Ness last year. So a team that I really think would fit him well is actually Tampa Bay. And they
Really?
draft Kalijah Cansey last year. They have Vita Vea. I think they had another strong body there because they did lose Shaq Barrett in free agency. I think they had a strong body along the edge that defensive line would continue to be a strength for them. So I like that there. And then obviously San Francisco as well, losing Chase Young. They did sign Yetur
YGM and
Gross-Matos,
yep.
YGM, and but they did lose Eric Armstead as well. So there are positions across the defensive line for the Niners that are positions of need. I think he'd fit in to any of those teams that I mentioned. But I kind of really, as a Panthers fan, I don't want to see him on the Buccaneers. But as a football fan, I think that would be a good pairing.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be a good pairing. I think there's an aspect that he still needs to kind of fine tune, kind of how his hands work, pad level type stuff, and some of that fine tuning and being a prospect that has, I believe, a lot of upside based on just his power and skill. is Kansas City. They've taken kind of George Karlaftis and Felix Anaduke recently. And it's more like if you're prepping for the future and you know Chris Jones isn't going to be there, trying to find that star guy and having the ability to sit a guy for a year, I think he's a great fit there. But I think the Tampa Bay one is a great comp. They've taken a lot of defensive players over the past couple of years at the top of the draft, and that matches Todd Bowles' philosophy and what he wants to do on defense and just as a team culture. And so I think that's a great fit. So the last guy on this list before we get to some kind of other guys that we're interested in kind of day three and later, is Chop Robinson, and he's an analytic and testing darling. This guy posted the highest RAWs out of the guys that we've talked about today at 9.72, higher than Jared Verse and Leitu Latu, who also scored above 9. His production, though, from a tackles for loss standpoint or sacks standpoint, was lower than all four of the previous guys that we talked about. But when we look at his true pass set win rate, overall pass rush win rate, he's right there with guys like Jared Verse, Chase Young, Joey Boza, and he's a good prospect. This is a guy that I think has a lot of upside, but I think there are a lot of things to be worried about, and part of that is just his ability to get overpowered in the run game. When guys are able to just kind of meet him and set their feet, they can nullify him in kind of blocking or just setting the run game and setting some of those gap holes. So I don't know what your thoughts are on him. I like him as a prospect, but again, I like your ranking that he's right here at 5.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying there. I think the case against Chop Robinson, which I think I'm a part of, is tape over testing. I know a lot of times during the draft cycle that we can get enamored with raw scores and the combine and things like that. And I'm not saying that those things aren't important because they clearly are. But when you turn on the tape and watch him, I agree with you there. Like he can get stacked super easily. Like positively, he has really good bend and dip, good burst, a low center of gravity. So he knows how to get up and under offensive linemen. The problem is he doesn't do it like nearly enough. I think his pathing, like on his rushes, is pretty linear. Like he doesn't try to get around offensive linemen. He tries to go through them, and he's not nearly big enough or strong enough to do that against Big Ten linemen. So I wonder if he's able to do it in the league because Big Ten linemen like Iowa, Ohio State translate pretty well in terms of skill level and size. So I do worry about that. He's certainly a like a twitchy, fast, good burst outside linebacker, but it reminds me of a couple years ago when draft pundits were hyping up Arnold Ebiketie, who also went to Penn State, and I wasn't super high on him either. I guess I didn't see it or anything. I think he ended up going to the Falcons, I think, at pick 40 that year. And I haven't heard too much about him as an Atlanta Falcon. I don't know. Like I think if you're going to be a smaller edge rusher, you just kind of have to offer more in the run game, and I don't think he does that currently. I also think his he gives up his chest quite a bit. You talked about him getting stacked. I think his arms need to be more active there, but I do think there is potential that he goes late round one. I just personally wouldn't. I wouldn't do it myself there. I think we talk about Dallas Turner, right, to the Falcons at pick 8. I think at pick 43, if they end up going like a Dunze or Bowers or something, I think they are going to need edge reinforcements, and they have drafted a guy like him before in Ebiketie out of Penn State, so maybe he could go there. We talked about the Saints as well at pick 14 in the first round. They hold pick 45 in the second. That could be a guy for them there. But as far as first round fits, I'm just not super sold on any of them. Maybe Baltimore because David Ajabo, Odafe Owe were both on the smaller side, so maybe they see something there. But I'm just not sure about a first round fit for Chop Robinson. I certainly do not want the Panthers to take him at 33 or 39.
Yeah, no, if he's there at 33, 39, like we talked about earlier, there are some Panther fans that think that he's the guy. I think he definitely comps similarly to like a Brian Burns in terms of like a speed
And
rusher, a guy that can get after the quarterback. But
if
again, go on.
if you yeah, if you remember coming out of the draft, one of the main concerns about Burns was he was too small, and I think
Hmm.
that showed up quite a bit his first 2 seasons. Well, and
And that's
to be fair, his first season Rivera had him playing gunner, but Rivera also hates rookies, so I don't know.
Yeah. No, and it's one of those things that I think he is undersized a little bit. He can get overpowered in the run game. And we've seen it with some of those guys that they're just gonna run right at you. And you get a lighter box and you have to set the edge. You have to be the guy that dictates that kind of side of the line of scrimmage. I don't think he has that in his game. Do I think he can get after the quarterback? Absolutely. But it may take a couple years for him to adjust and kind of fine tune what he needs to be an effective player, not only in the pass game but the run game. So with that, we're into some of the guys that you're kind of higher on later on, and one of the guys, Mo Camara out of Colorado State. I like this guy. He's got a high motor. He can get after the quarterback. Had a lot of high college production. His numbers in terms of pressure rate or win percentages are right there with some of the top prospects in previous years. So he's a guy that could fall that I would feel a lot more confident in taking on like the third round or the fourth round compared to taking a Chop Robinson in the second based on the things that we're talking about. What are the things you like about him? And do you like him over at Jonah Ellis and Marshawn Nealon, who we've had in? Marshawn Nealon we've had in. We haven't had Jonah Ellis. But those guys, what do you like about kind of him? And then where do you put him out of those three?
Yeah, shout out John Ellis of the Roar podcast. Very good Panthers creator. Always digs up all the old film. He's a lifer Panther. Go watch his stuff. But as far as Muhammad Kamara is concerned, you want to talk about production. Look what he did this past year at Colorado State. 13 sacks, 17 tackles for loss, a forced fumble, or two forced fumbles rather, and a touchdown and a fumble recovery. Really active outside linebacker, defensive end, rusher. Super fast, good bend, good motor. Like you were talking about, he stays with it. He's pretty good in the run game. I'm not sure why he's not getting more hype. It might be because he's a super senior like Verse and Latuar, and he also plays at Colorado State. So not a ton of hype there. The Mountain West doesn't generally get a lot of light shown on those teams, but I think he's had some terrific games this year, especially Boise State. I thought he was excellent that game, and he's just relentless. That's one of the things I wrote about him: relentless edge rusher that uses athleticism to dominate offensive linemen. And I think you need kind of guys that are like that, that are have a nasty streak to them, that want to play throughout the play. It's one of the reasons I wasn't too big of a fan of DJ Johnson last year. I thought Johnson was more tentative than a guy like Kamara is, and I would love to take him. I know he's probably going round 4 to 5 in the consensus. I would take him if we ended up trading back in the third round, like pick 80 or something like that. Exactly where we took DJ Johnson last year is around where I would have him. But I certainly would have him above Nealand. Um, I want to look at my edge rusher ranking. Actually, I have him below Nealand, but I think I would prefer him. Well, agnostically below, but for the Panthers above, I would take him. Um, as far as Nealon goes, I think we have had him in, or he's going to come in for a 30 visit. He's listed as an outside linebacker. I just don't see that. Kind of like Darius Robinson, I think he's more of the odd front defensive end, like plays more inside the defensive line. He's super strong. He has a good bull rush. He pushes the pile, things like that, and he's able to line up on the outside and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think he's more interior than he is edge rusher. Maybe in an even front, he could be an edge rusher,
I
but we play an odd front under Evero's
yeah.
scheme, which is the Fangio scheme is like half of the NFL nowadays, and I think the even front edge rusher is becoming more and more extinct. So I think he would show good versatility, more inside to out versatility than as a pure outside linebacker.
Yeah, where I see Nealon is that he could be the YGM replacement. I think he'd be great in the run.
Yeah, I agree there.
Um, and he'd be great as like a 4-3 end, but if he's going to be a wide 9 kind of guy, like I don't see it. I don't see him really adding value in terms of the defense where I think you have a little bit more versatility with a Mo Camara. Now, we kind of skipped over the other guy, Jonah Ellis. Is there anything that you see in his game? Do you think he's a good fit for the Panthers? Where does he fit in your overall rankings? Is he above Nealon, below Mo Camara? What do you like about his game, and what do you think will translate best?
He's above both of them. I have him like later round 2, round 3. I have Nealand and Kamara being like day 3 guys, but I think he's a really good technician. Like he knows how to use his hands and his arms when he's rushing the passer. I think if you watch the USC game again against Caleb Williams and that offensive line didn't do him any favors this year. But I think he does a really good job, like setting up and then taking down offensive linemen. It reminds me of an interview Miles Garrett gave maybe a year or two ago, when he talked about he would throughout the game purposely lose certain moves to offensive linemen to set them up to where a close game in the fourth quarter, he would just switch it up and when like just switch one little thing, tweak it, and take over the game there, get fourth quarter sacks. That's kind of what I envision Jonah Ellis being able to do. I think he can play wide nine and a little bit closer to the line, like over the tight end or over the tackle. My thing with him is I think he isn't a dominant athlete, and that's kind of what you want when you draft an edge rusher early. But I do think he's able to win just in terms of like using his mind, his technique, and he has a strong motor. He plays throughout the play, has good vision, like we talked about with Verse, like we talked about with Robinson. Knows when to disengage from his gap and go after the QB or the running back. I think he's just a sound fit. He's a guy that's not going to make too many mistakes, but I don't think he offers the athletic upside of a Marshawn Nealon or Mo Kamara. But for a guy that you would end up taking like at pick 65, I think I would rather have that guy because I know he's going to not make as many mistakes as the other two guys that we mentioned.
Yeah, it gives you a floor, and I like that. Sometimes that when you're in some of those later picks, it's better to just take a guy that you know who he is and know what he can bring to the table, and you aren't banking on upside. So we'll see if Dan Morgan buys into that. That's just not a guy that we've had in for a team top 30 visit. Out of the three guys that we talked about outside of the top five, only Nealon has one. So we'll see if Nealon's a guy that we take third, fourth round if we trade back a little bit, depending on just how the board goes. Again, a lot of this is just dependent on team boards and where guys land, because I think there's a lot of value to gain if for some reason we do trade back in the second and Chop Robinson's there in the 40s, maybe like early 50s. That's definitely a value take at that point. And similarly with some of these guys that we're talking about, as long as you're not reaching for them, I think you can grab some of these guys and they can provide instant value and can even get on the field and play valuable snaps. So we'll see how it all shakes out in a couple weeks. But for now, we are in the Purrfect Takes segment of the podcast. You kind of alluded to yours, but I'll let you kind of go back over it. Where's Dallas Turner going in this year's draft?
Some teams are very obvious with who they're drafting. Past couple years, some of the most obvious picks have been like Najee Harris to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last year, Bijan Robinson to the Falcons, I thought was one of the most obvious picks in the entire draft and turned out that way. And to me, Dallas Turner to the Falcons is a very obvious fit there. Their D line was super old last year, and half those guys are gone. So they really need an edge rusher. And I think Dallas Turner is the best one there. I think he fits what Raheem Morris is going to be able to do. Raheem Morris is kind of like a mad scientist on the defensive end, and I think taking like a freaky athlete like Turner is going to mesh well with him. Turner's going to the Falcons. Once the odds come out for it, I'll put money on it.
Okay. I like that. Like you said, the Falcons have been pretty predictable in taking, one would argue, non-premium positions recently, but I think this is a good one, especially the state of their defensive line, how they have a lot of older guys in that room. They rebuilt the offensive side after bringing in Kirk Cousins. It does seem like that's the direction they're heading. My take is that we're going to see four edge rushers in the first round, and I think we're going to see Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, Leitu Latu go. And it's just a matter of which Robinson goes. Like I said, Darius Robinson seems like a good fit in your perspective to Tampa. I think he could be a good fit in Kansas City as a guy that they're able to sit behind some of the guys they currently have and let him develop. And then there's Chop Robinson, where I think he's got a lot of high upside from some of these numbers. And we've seen teams value kind of guys that can get after the quarterback. And he checks that box off really well. So we'll see how it all shapes out. But those are our perfect takes for this week. Catch us next Tuesday as we go over interior defensive linemen and get 1 week closer to the draft. The draft starts on 4/25. We will try to do like an open space, something draft related on Twitter. We may not do it on the first round of the night. We may do it on day 2 when we actually have picks and have Panther related topics to talk about. And it'll be our luck that we trade into the first round and miss all that content. But you guys catch us next week. If you guys have any questions, shoot them to us at Purrfect_takes, and we will be happy to answer them. Until then, we'll catch you guys next week.